There is an idea of a Patrick Bateman, some kind of abstraction, but there is no real me, only an entity.
Researchers who examine the representation of sociopaths from fiction and non-fiction sources state that psychopathic villains of the mid-20th century have made space for a growing cast of protagonist psychopaths. They found that putting psychopaths into positions normally reserved for heroes or developing psychopathic characters to elicit compassion has diminished our fear and loathing. Fictional media used to portray primarily antagonist psychopaths, someone like Patrick Bateman from American Psycho and Anton Chigurh in No Country for Old Men, were shown to be bad to the core. They repelled us. With the introduction of more humanized offenders or anti-heroes like Tony Soprano and Walter White, audiences have grown more tolerant as well as more fascinated. This shift has primed us for accepting protagonist psychopaths like Greg House and Dexter Morgan. Even Sherlock Holmes referred to himself as a sociopath in the BBC series Sherlock. As protagonists, even heroes, psychopathic traits shed their negative connotations. They become adept rather than manipulative, or self-preserving rather than narcissistic. The researchers summarize that this can lead to quixotic romanticized psychopathy. A few non-fiction sources have contributed to this positive view, claiming that psychopaths have stronger brains, superior survival skills, a greater ability to make clear-headed decisions, and a superior facility for boldness. In other words, they might lack a conscience, exploit others, and be manipulative or destructive.
You always have been fucking crazy, haven't you?
Have I? Oh shit, you're right.
But they also have traits of value to human evolution. Why we sometimes find ourselves rooting for the Tony Sopranos, Walter Whites, and Harley Quinns of the world. It has to do with the extent to which we see aspects of our own personality in them. I think a big reason why there's more shows nowadays showing anti-hero characters is for the shifting culture the past years. Society used to be more collective, everyone working with one another, a part of the system. But the modern human sees himself as more of an individualist. Considering that anti-heroes represent a kind of ferocious individualism, they are perhaps more likely to be popular in individualist cultures or cultures in which individualist fantasies are cultivated. The idea of standing out, being unique, and acting selfishly on one's own behalf all fit within that kind of mindset. Some media psychologists argue that part of the pleasure of the so-called transportation into movies and TV is being able to experience danger or moral transgression from a safe distance. Of course, the downside is that we may become somewhat conditioned to give bad behavior a pass, or become desensitized to it, as the characters start to feel like relatable friends and as we repeatedly witness violent acts. Or we may feel our own aggressive impulses are more justified or valuable. I love Dr. House, partly because Hugh Laurie was such a genius in the role, and partly because you knew he ultimately had good intentions and outcomes underneath his calloused manner. Maybe I let him off the hook for his unethical means because he ultimately saved lives. The idea that the ends justify the means is in step with a more Machiavellian mentality.
I don't know what made me the way I am, but whatever it was left a hollow place inside. People fake a lot of human interactions, but I feel like I fake them all, and I fake them very well.
In the show Dexter, the TV show puts a spin on the genre as the protagonist is the killer in the show, and you follow his story. You sympathize with him as he has a genetic impulse to kill people, but he has a code to only kill bad people, so you support him through the series. One of Dexter's gripping qualities is his multi-layered personality. Dexter is like an onion. He has many layers to his personality, and everyone has to slowly pull them back, one by one, to discover each of them. At first, Dexter seems like a normal person, working at the police station, living in a nice home. But then, you find a whole different side of him. He is a serial killer. These different sides of him are not revealed by what anyone says or thinks, but from his own actions and thoughts. While Dexter is murdering someone, he becomes cold-hearted and vicious. But in his normal, everyday life, he is sophisticated and friendly. Nobody else knows about his secret. The only person who knows is his dead father, who talks to him in his daydreams. He gives Dexter advice with the problems Dexter is facing and helps him through it. Throughout the series, Dexter's character changes immensely. In the beginning, he was cold and awkward, but then he gets married to Rita and has a baby. He becomes more sensitive and caring. He acts differently around his children than he does at work, and definitely different than while he is murdering someone. It's almost as if Dexter has two alter personalities, two completely opposite identities put into one person. Gripping characters have multi-sided personalities, are clever thinkers, and know how to balance all of the different sides of themselves. Dexter is an amazingly well-built character, and everyone who watches the show cannot help but fall in love with. He is ironic in a perfect way, and that is what makes him a gripping character. He has the belief that killers should be killed, which signifies the idea that society wants justice, even if it's through means of violence. In this instance, Dexter's ethical violence signifies society's suppressed violent frustration of failing to properly punish murderers and meet ethical demands. Consequently, vigilantism and noble cause corruption are presented as the ideologies that resolve the imbalances in the social order. Dexter presents the value of meeting an ethical demand and placing justice over the law, which is why we give him a pass, and why everyone who watches the show cannot help but fall in love with him. Joe Goldberg is a bookstore manager in New York City. He's smart, witty, and charming. The only problem? He's a killer with a hero complex. We learn in season 1 that Joe feels protective of Paco because he also came from a difficult home life, which is further explored in the second installment of the show. Joe was neglected by his birth parents, and later he is taken by Mr. Mooney, the owner of the bookstore. Mooney imparts a love of reading into Joe, but he's also abusive, locking the young boy in the same vault that Joe uses in the future. Because of what he experienced as a child, Joe sees himself as a hero who needs to save others from the suffering he endured, which is why he dumps his girlfriend Karen in season 1. She's too normal and self-assured, and he is obsessed with Beck, who's fragile and insecure. You has always dared its audience to root for its sadistic anti-hero, presenting Joe as a conventionally attractive, ostensibly perfect protagonist, then contrasting that persona with his malicious deeds. The decision to narrate You mostly from the abuser's perspective is clever. It invites the viewer into Joe's mind from the beginning, showing us how he can rationalize his awful behavior with inner monologues that give us an insight into how he rationalizes his bad decisions. The result is part Gone Girl, part American Psycho, all horrifyingly disconcerting because of how easily it is to slip into Joe's way of thinking. Horror really takes on another layer when it makes you complicit with a killer, and that uncomfortable complicity is deliberate. According to author Caroline Kepnes, who wrote the novel on which You is based, the reaction to You online has seen some viewers defending him, romanticizing him, and perhaps most worryingly, displaying some serious victim blaming. Joe seems like a knight in shining armor. He has good taste in literature. He shuns social media. He despises the posturing, inauthentic upper-class socialites Beck associates with. Much of the sinister activities Joe participates in to isolate and control Beck, hiding in her shower, following her to a family outing, even watching her from her window, could just as easily be tropes we see in romantic comedies rather than thrillers. Until recently, we've romanticized and idolized the male character who tries time and time again to convince the girl of his dreams that he's right for her, and it's led us into a murky world where we're unable to separate archaic ideas of romance and chivalry from the actuality of stalking and downright creepy behavior.
I used to think that my life was a tragedy. But now I realize it's a fucking comedy.
The Joker was the ultimate character that got the most sympathy, love, and understanding. Arthur Fleck experienced childhood trauma and then continued trauma in how he was treated throughout his life. He continued to have an odd relationship with his mother. Early as a young child, he clearly sided with his aggressor, while she neglected him and let others abuse him. Instead of being angry, he found it more adaptive to align with her, nurture her, and be her caretaker. His anger, resentment, and unhappiness was deep inside him. When trauma occurs at a young age, it is often not represented in the mind as a narrative, or something that is remembered like one thing leading to another. In his conversion, his anger turned from being inward against himself, showing up as depression, to being outward, to the point of a murderous rage while he kills his mother. He says, the worst part of having mental illness is people expect you to behave as if you don't, which anyone who has suffered from mental illness might resonate with. There were parts of him that deeply needed empathy, but at the same time, there were aspects of his moral decision-making that are not tied to mental illness, but rather choice, namely his violent murders. When his boss asked him why he lost the sign, he said, "Did you not hear? I got mugged." This was an authority figure who did not see him, understand him, and ultimately believed the worst about him. I wanted to jump into the scene and defend him. To the social worker, he said, "No one hears me. You never listen. You ask me the same questions." His therapist responded, "You are on 6 medications. They have to be doing something." He yearned to be heard, understood, empathized with. He wondered if anyone could see his suffering. He told the man he thought was his father, Wayne, that he just wanted a little warmth from the talk show host. Instead of ridicule for his medical condition, he desired a hug, and even went as far as to have a delusion where the host told him, "I wish I had a son like you." In his fantasy of his female neighbor, he desired her emotional support during his mother's hospitalization. When it comes to the psychosis that Arthur was experiencing, it becomes helpful to think about the meaning under the psychosis. For Arthur Fleck, the meaning would be in his desire for a father, connection and admiration, love and meaning. This is felt not just by Arthur Fleck, but by all of us watching and immersed in his life. If you are lonely, isolated, and desire connection, you are human, and because we see that in Arthur Fleck, we feel for him and sympathize with him. The concept of attention is monumental. After killing the 3 rich men, he says, "People finally see me, and I wasn't sure if I existed, and people are starting to notice." He also commented that his social worker was not seeing him. She lacked empathy for his condition. Violence became the way he received attention in a world where he walked around feeling like a ghost. He played the character of a clown and wanted to be a comedian to gain attention. But finally, in violence, he gained the attention he so clearly wanted. He liked being loved and admired. Attention became the positive feedback that continued his violent path. Back to my original question. Is pop culture romanticizing sociopaths, psychopaths, and everyone in between? America loves a successful sociopath. They make such great protagonists. The actual, clinical definition of sociopathy is complex and hotly debated, but its cultural definition is satisfyingly simple. A human monster, one incapable of guilt or empathy. Fictional sociopaths let us see the darkest parts of ourselves. They make outrageous choices, which in turn drive outrageous plots. So next time you're watching a sociopath on screen, ask yourself, whose side am I on?